Avi Melamed, oficial de inteligencia del Ejército de Israel, es experto en terrorismo, analista de inteligencia estratégica, experto regional en Oriente Medio. Lo hemos llamado para preguntarle su opinión sobre la operación encubierta de Israel dentro de un hospital en Cisjordania. Las autoridades de Israel entraron de paisanos, de civiles, y mataron a 3 milicianos de Hamás dentro del hospital. La primera pregunta, Ana, para el señor Melamed, es ¿qué opina él por su trayectoria en inteligencia contra el terrorismo de esta acción de la defensa de Israel?
Good morning, Mr. Melamed. Thank you very much for your time today at W Radio. Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. So we wanted to begin by asking you, what is your opinion based on your experience in terms of intelligence and strategy of defense of these recent Israel actions?
I guess you are talking about the recent Israeli action in the West Bank, in Jenin, in the hospital?
Yes, sir, in the hospital.
Well, look, I mean, this has been kind of like quite exceptional operation because those units, these Israeli units that are disguised and you know, they are operating disguisedly in different parts of the West Bank and other areas, they are operating in different areas, but to the best of my recollection, that was the first time they actually operated inside a hospital, which was for itself quite a controversial issue. But since they were looking for those 3 terrorists, and those 3 terrorists were trying to find shelter in the hospital, I'm not a legal expert, but to the best of my knowledge, once hospitals or any public facility becomes a shelter for terrorists, according to the international law, to the best of my knowledge, that facility does not have any immunity anymore.
Pues nos dice que esta es una operación excepcional que llevaron a cabo estas unidades en Israel. Estas unidades operan en diferentes partes de Cisjordania, están en diferentes lugares de Cisjordania, pero nos dice que es la primera vez que actúan dentro de un hospital, que tienen una operación dentro de un hospital, que es algo bastante controversial, pero en este caso estaban buscando a 3 terroristas en específico que estaban buscando refugio dentro de esta facilidad. Nos dice que cuando un hospital o cualquier sitio público se vuelve un refugio de terroristas, según la ley internacional, ahí pierde la inmunidad y por eso lo ve válido dentro de la ley internacional o el marco internacional.
Pero Ana, aquí cayeron 3, según ellos, terroristas, milicianos de Hamás dentro de un hospital. Pero vamos a las cabezas, masterminds, esos cerebros de Hamás viven en Qatar, en Beirut y en Teherán. Él cree que con esta estrategia de seguir matando milicianos de Hamás en Gaza o en Cisjordania y por el camino matando mujeres y niños inocentes, ¿van a poder llegar a los rehenes? ¿Qué es lo más importante hoy para Israel?
So here in this attack, 3 Hamas terrorists were killed inside the hospital. But let's speak about the masterminds of Hamas. Those masterminds, those leaders of Hamas are living in Qatar, in Tehran, in Beirut. Do you think that with this strategy of keep on killing Hamas fighters, Hamas terrorists, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the way while they're killing these fighters of Hamas, they're also killing women and children, but are not reaching the masterminds of Hamas. Do you think that there is any way of getting closer to the hostages, which is allegedly the priority for Israel?
Look, Hamas is a terror organization that has a genocidal agenda. It vows to eliminate the state of Israel. We also what Hamas did on October 7th. Hamas are saying that, and they have built a military power as part of their plan to eliminate Israel. Now, Israel is fighting Hamas. It's a very complex war because Hamas is using the people of Gaza Strip, its own brothers and sisters, as a human shield to protect Hamas themselves. So Hamas militants and its leaders are hiding in tunnels while they leave their brothers, the Gaza civilians, exposed. Israel is fighting a very complex war in Gaza Strip, trying at the same time to hit Hamas and to dismantle Hamas military capacities, and at the same time trying to avoid as much as possible collateral damage. So this is a very, very challenging task. As for the leaders of Hamas, yes, some of them, as you said, are in different places in the Middle East. They live very comfortably in the Middle East, in Qatar or in Turkey or in other places, in Lebanon. Some of Hamas leaders are in Gaza Strip, hiding in the tunnels. The issue about Hamas, in the end of the day, the objective is not to eliminate Hamas to the last person, because Hamas is not going to disappear. Hamas is a political movement. It has a deep ideological roots. It has support across different parts of the region, including the Palestinians. So the idea is not to eliminate Hamas. The idea here is, in the end of the day, because Hamas is a terror organization and a very radical one, and a very brutal one, the idea is, in the end of the day, to minimize Hamas' ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda. Up until now, Hamas, unfortunately, was quite successfully dictating its radical agenda, and basically it was dictating a path of destruction and no hope and violence for both Israelis and Palestinians. Hamas also, in that regard, is serving the Iranian regime, which has an interest in perpetuating the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So the whole idea of this war against Hamas, in the end of the day, is to make Hamas as much as possible unable to continue and to dictate its radical agenda.
Yes, let me translate that. I'm sorry, let me translate that really quickly. Nos dice que Hamás es una organización terrorista con una agenda genocida que quiere acabar con Israel. De hecho, ya lo han anunciado de esa manera. Nos dice que el propósito de Israel no es acabar con Hamás. Esta es una guerra bastante compleja. Nos dice que Hamás lo que hace es usar civiles como escudos humanos en la franja de Gaza para protegerse, y pues algunos de sus líderes se esconden en los túneles y sus miembros también, mientras sus hermanos y hermanas quedan expuestas. Estos civiles que no tienen nada que ver con ellos sí quedan expuestos a la merced de estos ataques que está haciendo Israel. Así que es una guerra bastante compleja la que está peleando Israel en la franja de Gaza. La idea que ellos tienen es golpear, o más bien desmantelar, las capacidades militares que tiene Hamás y evitar todo el daño colateral que puedan, lo cual es una tarea bastante difícil, pero nos dice que en cuanto a los líderes, por supuesto que algunos están en el Medio Oriente viviendo cómodamente en Qatar, en Turquía, en el Líbano. Algunos ya están en Gaza escondidos en túneles. El problema al final del día, como nos venía comentando, no es eliminar a Hamás o la última persona que haga parte de esta organización, porque no es posible, no va a desaparecer. Hamás es un movimiento político con raíces ideológicas, tiene apoyo en diferentes lugares y grupos de la región, incluidos algunos palestinos. Entonces la idea acá es acabar con las capacidades que tiene esta organización terrorista extremista y que comete actos brutales para minimizar estas acciones y capacidades que cometen en contra de Israel. Entonces nos dice que ahora lo que quieren hacer es acabar, digamos, ese camino de destrucción y violencia, y acabar con ese camino de desesperanza que quiere llevar a cabo Hamás, que es parte de su agenda, con el apoyo de Irán, que pues por supuesto le interesa perpetuar este conflicto, y pues esa es la idea que tienen, que Hamás cada vez tenga menos capacidad para continuar con su agenda genocida.
Señor Melamed, el centro de la guerra está en Gaza y también se calienta la frontera con el Líbano frente a Hezbollah, pero este operativo tuvo lugar en Yenín, que es en la zona de Cisjordania, la margen occidental. ¿Cómo está la situación allí? ¿Se está calentando un nuevo frente de batalla sumado a Gaza y al Líbano? Allí en Cisjordania, ¿podrá Israel enfrentar todos los frentes?
The center of the war, of course, it's at Gaza. We also have the situation in the border with Lebanon and Hezbollah. But this happened in the West Bank. So it's a new focus, perhaps, in this war. Do you think that Israel is going to be able to, withstand all of these fronts, the one in Gaza, the one in Lebanon, and now this one at the West Bank?
Well, actually, what we see in the West Bank is not new. Since the beginning of the war, and in fact, before the war, there has been an ongoing tension in the West Bank. There is an ongoing frictions between Israeli defense forces and Israeli security forces on the one hand, and Palestinian militants in different parts of West Bank since a long period of time. It started before the war. Since the war started, it has been further escalating on the ground in the West Bank as well, but the incident or the operation that we saw the other day is not new, meaning in the sense that it's yet another link in this ongoing chain of friction between Israel and Palestinian militants in the West Bank.
Pues nos dice que esto en Cisjordania no es nuevo, esto desde el comienzo de la guerra se ha venido escalando, incluso antes de la guerra ha habido tensiones en Cisjordania y ya fricciones con militantes palestinos en diferentes partes de Cisjordania. Nos dice que incluso esto antes del 7 de octubre, pero desde ese momento pues ha ido escalando esa tensión en el terreno. Nos dice que el incidente que vimos recientemente no es nuevo, es el eslabón más que hace parte de esa cadena de fricciones que se han presentado desde que comenzó la guerra, e incluso nos reitera que antes del 7 de octubre.
Señor Melamed, ¿es habitual que fuerzas especiales israelíes actúen de esta forma, disfrazados, en este caso del hospital, de médicos, sanitarios, incluso de mujer, en Cisjordania? ¿Es habitual ese tipo de ataques, digamos, camuflados?
Is it usual for Israeli and special forces to do attacks like this one, in which they are dressed up as doctors, even as women, to perform this attack? Is it usual, this type of camouflaged attacks?
Well, this is one of the different means that Israeli security and intelligence and military forces are using as they are fighting terror. Particularly, we have to remember that the Palestinian militants that are operating in different parts of the West Bank are operating in a deliberately, knowingly, they are operating from within their own civilian environment. They are operating in residential areas. They are operating, as we saw, in hospitals. They are operating in schools. So they are taking advantage or trying to take advantage that they are surrounded by civilians and basically trying to use that to their advantage. So when you try to reach those specific individuals that are involved in terror, that are operating from such a civilian environment, and as Israel is doing, trying to do that as at the same time trying to minimize as much as possible collateral damage, you have to think out of the box. You have to operate in different ways, in terms of intelligence gathering, in terms of operational mindset and modus operandi. So there are different tactics, there are different ways and means that the Israeli defense forces and the Israeli security services are using in order to, in the end of the day, to reach to those specific terrorists and to neutralize them. One of them is the using of those tactics of camouflage, of operating discreetly within a massively populated area. And the whole idea is to try to do those operation based upon a very, very, very accurate intelligence, and to do it as fast as possible, as efficient as possible, to make sure that the mission is accomplished, to do it in a very short period of time, and not less significant, to do it in a way that there will be no casualties among civilians and innocent people as much as possible.
Pues nos dice que pues las fuerzas de inteligencia en Israel y las fuerzas de seguridad usan diferentes tácticas para combatir el terror. Recordemos que estos militantes palestinos en diferentes partes de Cisjordania operan sabiendo deliberadamente que están en zonas residenciales, que están en zonas de civiles, en hospitales, colegios. Entonces se aprovechan de que están rodeados de civiles para usarlo a su ventaja o como ventaja de ellos. Entonces, cuando llegan estos individuos a operar con terror en zonas de civiles, Israel trata al mismo tiempo de minimizar el daño colateral, pensar de una manera creativa y operar de una manera distinta, diferente, y usar modus operandi que le permita a esta inteligencia de Israel usar tácticas de defensa que no ponga tanto en riesgo a los civiles. Entonces, por eso usan ese tipo de camuflaje, de disfraces, que es una de las tácticas que emplean, de las muchas que tienen, para llegar así a neutralizar a sus enemigos o a los blancos que tienen. Ellos lo que pretenden es hacer esta operación de manera eficiente, segura y lo más exacta posible para que la misión se cumpla en un corto periodo de tiempo y, como nos decía, evitar así la muerte de civiles, incluso en áreas pobladas.
Con respecto a la guerra en Gaza, estamos al parecer a las puertas de un acuerdo por los secuestrados que implicaría la liberación de muchos terroristas, de los que llaman en Israel con sangre en las manos, en las cárceles israelíes. Hamás ha puesto como condición que también implique el fin de la guerra, que significaría la liberación de sus secuestrados israelíes, pero la supervivencia de Hamás como organización, lo cual pone a Israel en un dilema. ¿Podrá aceptar el acuerdo Israel?
In terms of what's happening in Gaza, the war in Gaza, there seems like the talks to have a ceasefire and end the war are moving forward. This ceasefire would see all of the hostages from Israel being released, and a lot of terrorists that are currently detained in Israel with what they are allegedly called blood in their hands be also released, as well as having Hamas asking to put an end to the war and the survival of Hamas as an organization. To an extent, this is a dilemma for Israel. Do you believe that this could move forward, a ceasefire that, that would imply that Hamas terrorists will be released, but also the survival of Hamas as an organization?
Well, first, I think that we will see moving forward with this deal, because in the end of the day, both sides, Israel and Hamas, though they have a lot of restrictions and resentment and so on, they also have some needs to meet, and therefore I think that today both sides have an interest to move on with trying to conclude such a deal. Now, as for the issue of the survival of Hamas, as I said before, Hamas is not going to disappear. The issue here is, in the end of the day, to make sure that Hamas will not be able to go back again, rule Gaza, and basically make Gaza to what Gaza became, a kingdom of terror that basically presents a very significant threat to the state of Israel. Now, Hamas will remain part of the Palestinian people, and in the end of the day, the Palestinian people, in their inner discussion, they will have to decide whether they are going to continue to take Hamas path, which basically mean that they are going to dead-end street, because Hamas took the Palestinians in Gaza to a dead-end street, or whether they're going to find some other ways to basically compromise and understand that there is a reality that the state of Israel is not going to vanish, and accordingly they will have to compromise with that. But this is a long-term process. In the end of the day, that's not Israel's mission. Israel's mission is to make sure that Israel will be safe and Israeli citizens will be safe and not threatened and not exposed to terror attacks. So I would say that in that regard, the idea is, in the end of the day, and this is, by the way, this interest is not only in Israeli and Palestinian interest to make sure that Hamas will not be anymore able to continue and to dictate its radical way. It's also interest of major Arab states like Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and United Arab Emirates, who will shed no tear to see Hamas falling down, because Hamas is also threatening them. So in the end of the day, I think that today, following this war, and I hope that will be the situation, there will be a new reality where, as I said before, it's not about Hamas disappearing, it's about basically making sure that Hamas will not be able to continue and to dictate its radical agenda as it was able to do up until now.
Well, Mr. Avi, thank you so much for being with us in W Radio. It's been a pleasure having you today in our show.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Él cree que veremos un acuerdo avanzar porque, digamos, le beneficia a ambas partes, que obviamente tienen su resentimiento, tienen sus restricciones, pero a ambos les conviene llegar a un acuerdo por las circunstancias que hay en la guerra ahora mismo. Y nos dice que Hamás, como ya nos había dicho en una respuesta anterior, no va a acabar. Al final del día ellos van a seguir. Hamás es parte de los palestinos y los palestinos son los que tienen que decidir si continúan el camino de Hamás o si van a encontrar otras maneras de comprometerse, porque la realidad es que el Estado de Israel existe, no va a desvanecer y los palestinos deben comprometerse con eso, pero esa no es la misión de Israel. La misión de Israel es mantener a sus ciudadanos seguros, que no estén expuestos a estos ataques de terror a los que Hamás los pone en riesgo. Entonces, al final del día, la idea que ellos tienen es que Hamás no pueda cometer estos actos de terror, no pueda dictar esas ideas de terror que ellos tienen, y le conviene no solo a Israel, sino a otros países árabes que también se ven amenazados por ellos. Entonces, él cree que al final de la guerra va a haber una nueva realidad, y es que Hamás no va a continuar. Eso es lo que él espera, al menos.
En la W, una reina.
Ay, Grace, muchas gracias.